we've got a couple of different topics that we're going to talk about. Doing some of these in video format too, but I like doing lives. I just gotten out of the habit of doing live, so I figured I would come back to you guys and do some lives. Why not, right? So recently on Reddit, I put up a topic that has gotten some traction and had some people comment or whatnot, and it's specifically about what topic. Sorry, this is cutting out, it seems. We'll see. I'm going to bring you guys closer so that I can get to the phone if I need to. But with you, when you go cut firewood, and it made me realize a couple things, which, I mean, nothing like major, but it did make me think about and realize a couple things, which partly were that the way I view doing firewood, because of the way that firewood fits into my life, right, is different. A lot of people view firewood, and that's fine. One of the things that I noticed is that a lot of people go out and they cut, buck, split right there and bring it all back, and nothing wrong with that at all. I've never really done it that way, simply because usually I'm working with one or two guys, and we have a certain, it was more based on like a service oriented focus, like doing tree work, and firewood was a secondary thing. So we would go cut whatever trees we needed to cut, and then we would buck those trees up, and then we would go and take the rounds somewhere else and split them as a general rule. It was rare that we ever split any firewood on somebody's property for them. I don't know, it was, now that I think about it, it's kind of strange that we didn't, because there were a lot of people who burned wood, but they just, I don't know. It's becoming less common out here in Western Colorado, for sure. Less people are burning. So that's a whole thing on its own, right? But hey Jeff, what's up? Thanks for stopping by. But it's, it's not something that has disappeared, and it won't, right? It's going to be around for a while. But what that made me think of is how I start thinking about talking about firewood, not because I'm anybody who is specifically like an expert on firewood, but when I'm talking about it, looking at what I'm doing in comparison to what you guys are doing, and trying to apply some of what you guys are doing. I know at least a lot of people who used to follow me owned tree services or whatever, and firewood sometimes, or a lot of times, is a byproduct of tree service work. So you're not really a firewood producing company as your focus. It's just something you do on the side to whatever you're trying to get rid of. You've got all this wood, you got to get rid of it, whatnot. So hey everybody, thanks for logging in, thanks for being on the live, appreciate it. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to deal with firewood, right? Like how you attack it really depends on what the purpose of the firewood is. So like here in Colorado, you can buy permits. I don't know how it is in other states, but you can buy permits to go out on BLM land, which is Bureau of Land Management, and you can cut down certain trees that they have designated. Some areas you can cut down live trees. Some areas you have to only cut down standing dead. Some areas you only can pick up what's already down. It just depends on how they have it oriented. I'm from the western slope of Colorado, so that has an effect on it, right? Some you can't take vehicles very close to where the firewood is, and some, or any kind of motorized vehicle, and some you can kind of like drive back to where the wood is and get it. So once again, that would all determine what you're doing and how you're processing it, what tools you have with you, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of shifted how I think about firewood when I talk about it for everybody, because I've learned, I guess I always knew, but it's just come to mind that it's expanded, right? Um, so yeah, it's always interesting for sure. Um, what's going on now though is I am working with a lot of different wood that we already had from the tree service. So basically I go out and kind of spend like a day or a couple of days bucking up that wood, and then I go and split it later, right? Well, the interesting aspect of that is that it's not all just out on the ground for firewood bucking up. It came in like dump trailers or whatever, and was like just dumped into these piles, which means a lot of it's kind of like on top of each other. And at the time, a lot of this, we had the skid steer with the grapple. So to make it more compact, we would grab it all and put it all up in piles and stuff. So a lot of it's stacked, and that even includes, you know, bigger 34-inch or 40-inch diameter pieces, trunks that are like 10 foot long, and they're kind of precariously balanced. So I use different tools maybe than a lot of people would, but also I realized some people are not using tools that honestly I really think most people should have for firewood. And so it got me to thinking about this topic a little bit more. And some of it's for the safety factor, because I know a lot of guys are like, oh, I'll just make it work and whatever. And that's fine if that's how you want to live your life. A lot of people get injured. I used to work with arborist and forestry product companies, equipment companies and things. And you get these reports that talk about how many people died, how many people were sent to the hospital, all that stuff. And, you know, I've always been more of a cautious person, not super cautious, I guess, because I climb trees for a living, but I've been a conscientious person of safety to a large degree. And what I've found is that there are certain simple tools that I guess get taken for granted or are thought of in specific applications of an industry, and therefore they don't get used. It's not common for them to be used. And it's funny, like you hear a lot of talk online about like cant hooks, right? So I talk about this in one of the videos, but as far as I understand from some of the information that I've looked up, cant hooks kind of follow a first tool, second tool, third tool kind of idea, where a cant hook with the hook on the bottom, the dog, was originally the design. That was the first design or something, is what I understand. It was the PV that came second, and that was designed by PV. I can't remember his name. Maybe Joseph PV or something was the blacksmith that made the first, you know, or is attributed to making the first PV. And then the log jack is the stand that clamps or can be welded or whatever to a cant hook or PV, where it has a little foot and you can pry it back and roll the log up off the ground, right? So I've heard people refer to cant hooks as PVs, PVs as cant hooks, and both of those, a cant hook and a PV, as a log jack. And I'm not going to correct people. I'm just letting you know they're not technically the same thing, right? Is that the end of the world? No, it's not. But just know that some people understand those differences, and you might be getting confused, or you might confuse them if you're trying to buy one and you're like, I want a PV, and they bring out a PV with a spike, but you're like, no, I want the PV with a hook, which is technically a cant hook. Or if you say, I want a log jack, they might bring you just the foot and not the whole cant hook with the foot on it, if that meant the stand on it. So that's something that I noticed, especially in Reddit. I've noticed that a lot of people refer to them as different things. But secondly, I noticed that a lot of people aren't using cant hooks or anything when they're cutting firewood. It's like, it's common for sawmills to have them, because you got to roll and flip and whatever, and that's, yeah, hence the word cant, right? Cant hook. But if you're not using a cant hook or a peavey to like roll logs and stuff, first off, you have a real high potential of damaging your chain or dulling it, right, from going into the dirt if you're cutting all the way through. Second, you're bending a lot to try to roll logs or whatever, and if it's a bigger log or if there's branch knobs or something at a crotch or whatever, you could really like be having to get down there and push. Maybe you don't even hurt yourself, but you're exhausting yourself when you don't need to. And then third, if you do have logs, like you're felling trees and they crossed over each other and they're in weird positions and whatever, with a little bit of work with a cant hook, you could take a pretty sketchy position for, you know, running chainsaws and turn it into a much safer situation. So do with that what you will. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just trying to help you guys see there's a lot of good reasons to have a cant hook in your possession when you're cutting firewood and bucking up logs for firewood. You know, of course, it all depends on the circumstances and whatnot. And I'm not saying you should have it with you every time, or I'm not trying to tell you you should absolutely have it. I'm just saying it might be a good idea for you to think about it. And it might create a safer environment, or even if not for safety, just an easier environment and less wear on your saw. It can help prevent binding if you get your logs in the right position and orientation or whatever, all that kind of stuff, and less sharpening of your chain, which I know some people love sharpening chains, most people do not. So just a thought. I thought it might help you guys to kind of see that it could be something a little bit different, right? So that's one thing. A second thing is, somebody asked on Reddit recently where to get aftermarket handles for your chainsaw, like a 661 or an 881 or a 462 or a 500i or whatever the equivalents are in Husky. I don't know all the numbers for Husky because I don't have much experience with Husky. I've only had a few in my life. I think they're great saws. It's just, I grew up with Stihl, and the most, until recently, the most convenient and the only dealer in town that had a mechanic was a Stihl dealer. So I went with Stihl dealer. In fact, we didn't even have a Husky dealer for a while. So with all that being said, the guy on Reddit was asking where to get aftermarket wrap bars. To be honest with you, I don't know if there are aftermarket ones. I'm sure there are. There's an aftermarket for just about everything. So if you want full wrap bars for your chainsaws, at least for Stihl, I can't speak for Husky because I don't know, but I'm pretty sure even for Husky, the full wrap handles where the right handle and the left handle look equal, it doesn't get thin to the clutch case, they are available. I'm sorry, not the clutch case, the fillers. They are available, but they're OEM as a general rule. Like I said, you might find that there are aftermarket ones, but definitely there are OEM ones. And you can usually just get them through your dealer. So most of the Stihl saws from, like, I don't know if the 362s or whatever, I don't know if they have them, but at least the like 461 or 462s, the 500i's, 661s, all those, you can actually buy them from the factory with the full wrap handle. So if you're looking for a full wrap handle, you don't have to look for OEM. I mean, aftermarket. You can just get OEM. They're not that expensive. You have to finesse and finagle a little bit. There are some pros and cons to full wrap bars though, and I think it's important before you go out and buy one, you kind of understand what you're getting. I had a saw with a full wrap bar, and for tree climbing, it was great. For felling, if you're doing lots of felling, it's great if you're high stumping. In the tree service world though, we were trying to like low stump everything to a few inches off the ground. And the challenge there was when you have a full wrap handlebar, or full wrap handle, I should say, on your saw, it limits how low you can get to the ground, which might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. It depends on what is common in your area and what your clients expect. But just keep in mind that they do add a little weight. They can get in the way, like the saw becomes wider, so the case gets wider, and in like crotches of trees, it's harder to get it in there sometimes to make a cut because the bar can get in the way if it's a full wrap. If you're trying to low stump, it's going to limit where you can low stump to. Other than that, they're pretty handy. It's nice to be able to grab the saw from either side and have a full handle without your fingers like going in between the saw case and the handle and getting kind of tight. But no big deal. But I just thought I'd throw that out there. Full wrap bars are, full wrap handles are common, and they are OEM for your saws. So you don't need to go look for aftermarket stuff, just FYI. Another thing is, I've seen a bit of chatter about chains, and this is for like newbies mainly, because you guys that have been running saws for a long time, you're gonna know this to a large degree, maybe all of it, so that's fine. The thing about chainsaw chains being sharp or not is that there's definite indicators if you have a dull chain, right? So one major indicator is that it's just not cutting. Like you're putting pressure on the saw and it's like really, really, really fine dust or no dust. Usually you're gonna have some dust. Even a dull chain typically cuts something. It just doesn't cut efficiently. Second off, the dust, the saw chips that come out are not gonna be chips, they're gonna be dust. It's almost gonna be like a table saw or a bandsaw cut. It's gonna be a fine dust that comes out, right? Third, as the chain spins, you should be able to notice, or you might notice, I should say, you don't want this, but you might notice that the teeth start to turn blue and purple. Your chain is dull or you're hitting something. And if you're hitting something, most likely your chain is dull. So keep that in mind. That's another way to know. And then the last is if you're trying to cut and it's smoking and you're not making any progress, probably your chain is dull or your bar is pinched or something. But a lot of times, no matter what's going on, if it's smoking, if this is occurring, if your teeth are blue, if there's not much like chip coming out, it's all dust, your chain is dull. You just may have another factor going along with it. Like maybe your bar is pinched, but it's also dull because the chain just spinning and rubbing the friction on the wood can make it eventually dull if you overheat the chain. So it's not really that hard to tell if your chain is dull. What might be harder to tell though is if you have a sharp chain and let's say you're cutting through a union of a tree like a branch crotch, or there is an old branch with wound wood on it and it's a hard knot, or maybe you're at the root flare of a trunk where it's flaring out and you're trying to cut through a hardwood like ash or oak or something, and it's cutting and you're getting through. It's a little slower than normal, but you've got also a lot of fine dust and not a lot of chips. You may think your chain is dull, but because of the compression wood that occurs, your chain actually may not be dull. It may just be that the fibers are in such varied directions that it's not producing many large chips. If you're in doubt, if you can, take your chain, do a visual inspection, because technically, once you get familiar with chains and sharp chains and whatnot, you should be able to tell just by looking at your chain if it's sharp or not, to a relative degree, but for the most part. But if you're in doubt, if you have a log or a branch or something that's laying on the ground and it's just normal like straight grain wood and you're cross-cutting through the branch, then you should be able to cut that, and if it has chips coming out and not a lot of dust, then it's still sharp. It's just whatever you're cutting has a weird grain texture in it that's causing it to not react like a cross-cut grain would normally, right? So yes, it can be finicky, but there are ways to figure it out. If you're ever trying, let's say you're like, man, my chain is really dull, and you figure that out and then you go to sharpen. If your file with mild pressure doesn't grab and take off like a fine dust of metal, it skitters across real fast and you feel like nothing's coming off the teeth, then you've got teeth that have gotten hardened. You might want to go and look at getting a new chain, depending on how many of them are or how long the chain is, or you might need to have some teeth replaced on your chain. So I was asked recently, well, if you replace teeth, doesn't that mean that it'll throw the chain off balance? And the answer to that is not really, okay? So there are times when it's worth replacing teeth, and there's times when it's not worth replacing teeth. When is it worth replacing teeth? Usually if you have a really long bar and your chain is really long and the chain is expensive. So usually I don't worry about replacing teeth if the bar is less than 36 inches in my case. Most of my dealers for chain, it costs me more money to have them spin out teeth or whatever and put new teeth in drivers in than it does to buy a new chain, or at least it's close to like 2/3 the cost of a new chain. So it doesn't make any sense to have them do that work. Now, if you're running really big chains, 36 inch, 42 inch, 56, 60 inch, something like that, then it starts to get more worthwhile to have your chains, the teeth replaced if they need to be replaced and whatever. If you put new teeth in though, as long as the teeth are ground to the same angle as the teeth that already exist, it should cut straight. You shouldn't have much issue. As a general rule, there is a time when you're looking at the teeth that exist and you're like, man, those just aren't worth it, because they're they're almost gone. You've filed them and filed them and filed them. Well, then in that case, don't, buy a new chain, right? The current chain I'm running on my 661 is a 24-inch bar. It's 050 chain, 84 link, I think it is. I can't remember. And so there are three teeth that I guess they hit metal at some point. It looks like, and they got hot and they're dull, and I can't hardly get them filed. The file just skitters across them. I run a skip tooth square cut, which is pretty aggressive, and I keep my rakers a little lower than most people say that you should. So even though those teeth aren't real great, I haven't really worried about them. It does create a situation where my cuts aren't perfectly straight. I don't care for what I'm doing. I'm out there bucking up a bunch of wood that's got a bunch of mud on it. It's sitting in the dirt. Sometimes I'm getting into other dirt. I'm cutting through crotches that have a lot of dirt because they were hollow and rotten and whatever, sat there for decades. It's a trash chain at this point. So am I going to replace that chain right now? No. Am I going to have the teeth replaced? No. Does that mean that chain, the teeth being on that chain are okay? Well, technically, no. It's not great to have teeth like that, but considering it's a 24-inch bar and considering the size of the saw, 661 with a bark box muffler on it, and a high flow air filter, those three teeth aren't causing much drag, to be honest. It's not hurting that saw at all. That saw it doesn't even feel those, well, it fills them, but it doesn't even feel those teeth that much. So do I really worry that it's wearing the motor or the drivers or the bar? Or no, if it was multiple teeth, then I would be more concerned. The other factor is that the three teeth that are bad are all on the right side. They're right side cutters. They're not left side. It's not right and left. So that being the case, it's got a tooth in between each one that's actually cutting. And so once again, not an ideal situation, not encouraging you to do that. The optimal situation is just don't do that. Go get a new chain or whatever. But for my current situation, I'm not going to spend the money on a new chain that's going to cost me $70. Or no, what would that cost me? Cost me, yeah, $80 for a chain, when this one will work for a little bit longer, and then eventually all the teeth will get bad enough I'll replace it within a shorter amount of time. If I was looking at that chain for every day in and out, making proper felling cuts and all this stuff, then I would not be running that chain. I would get a chain that had good teeth on it and do that. But for bucking up wood in the dirt, it's okay. I'm not gonna fight it. I just, you know, keep trying to sharpen those same bad teeth as frequently as I can, and that's what I do. And so there we go with that. So I hope that kind of helps out a little bit. I hope that's a little bit of information that you guys find interesting. Once again, not encouraging bad habits, just explaining how it is that I'm doing things and what I've heard people ask, right? That's kind of what I have. Now, the second thing is, I just realized today that the Fiskars X27, I don't know where that logo is on there or whatever. Yeah, right there. X27, the splitting axe. I just realized that even though I've made comparisons between it and the Husky S2800 forestry axe, this guy, did notice a couple of things about them. One is that the blade on the Husky is definitely broader. The X27 is the same length at the tip, at the top tip, but they're not the same. And I hadn't really thought about that before. It still feels like they're made pretty much with the same construction. Feels like there's steel down in the shaft here and in here. Of course, this has a overstrike protector on it. The other thing is that the splitting axe, the blade is flat. It has very little radius to it, whereas this one has a much stronger radius to it, right? So they're definitely different in certain applications in certain ways. I tried them chopping today. So not splitting wood, but actually chopping, like you were going to cut a tree in part, right? You're going to part a tree in sections. So I had it was a really dry cottonwood log, and I worked on it for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. And I gotta tell you, even though this Fiskars is technically a splitting axe, and this guy here is what they call a forestry axe, so it is like supposed to be a little bit of everything, a little bit of splitting if you need, chopping branches off, maybe chopping, you know, cross-cutting if your saw gets stuck or whatever. The Fiskars like beat it out hands down for chopping. Now, in all fairness, I think this guy needs a little bit of a sharpening, which I'll do. But I mean, the Fiskars was like taking some wood out of that trunk that I was cutting through. So I was really surprised at how efficient this was for actually chopping, not just splitting. It's funny because it defies all the common chopping axes with its slightly flat, very, I mean, it's got a slight radius to it, but not much. And I was really surprised, whereas I thought this one would chop like through a trunk better, but it doesn't. This one does. The Fiskars definitely does. Once again, I'm going to sharpen up this this Husky one and give it a go. Chopping again, because there are some nicks in the blade and whatnot. It's been through a lot in its life. But yeah, I was really surprised at how well the Fiskars did in chopping. So that was really cool. I just liked experimenting with that. I'm going to start doing more chopping even on the channel, just a little bit chopping here and there, not really for any need, just for fun. I like chopping wood. I like using axes. So man, it's a workout too. Not sponsored by Maverick, which is a gas station out here in Colorado. Just thirsty. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is I've got a video coming out soon, and in that video we talk about chaps. And these are my Clogger Zeros. They are expensive. I think almost $300 if I remember correctly, or $200 or something like that. But totally worth it. Really good quality. I'm not going to do a full review of them in this video, in this live at least, but what I will say is understanding the difference between chaps and chainsaw pants is pretty important. Not because one is particularly better than another, they're just different. So what I guess what you should know or think about with chaps is that the more you pay for chaps as a general rule, the better they are. And the better they are doesn't particularly mean they stop a chainsaw better. That might be the case because the safety rating or measurement for chainsaw chaps is based on a minimal standard met, right? So every legitimate chainsaw chap out on the market, every one of them, will have to meet a minimal standard, right? So, like, here's the standard. The chainsaw chap did better than that standard, they pass. Chainsaw chap does worse than that standard, they don't pass. They can't be sold as chainsaw chaps. If they even meet that bottom line, they pass. Like, that is the minimal standard, right? So technically, I guess you're not ever going to get a particularly unsafe pair of chainsaw chaps, right? However, chainsaw chaps do vary. With quality of chainsaw chaps, you get different things, like some might have pockets for like your scrunch or a sharpening file. Some might not have pockets, but they might have more snaps on them to keep them closer to your leg and more fitted. Whereas cheaper ones don't have as many straps on the leg. Cheaper ones might not go all the way down to your boot, whereas more expensive ones are longer as a general rule and typically will. Cheaper ones possibly won't go as far around the leg, whereas more expensive ones typically do. And in fact, some chaps are full calf chaps where the chap wraps all the way around the calf, almost like a pair of pants. But once again, the more chainsaw material in them, the more expensive they're probably going to be, right? And then on top of that, another aspect is the material they're made out of, as far as like all the materials are made out. So like the outer material that protects the chainsaw stopping material inside, cheaper ones usually are thinner, and if they get picked by your chain or on a branch or something like that, there's a good chance it'll cut and just not be as good, right? Whereas more expensive ones, like these, I've used them a lot in brush and around trees and around my chainsaw, and they haven't picked yet. Whereas even my steel ones tended to pick much faster, but they were like $70 versus $200. So that's one thing. Another thing is the comfort of the webbing and the buckles. If you're going to be using these for long periods of time and very frequently, comfort is a big deal. So the buckles, certain plastic buckles are brittle and they snap real easy. Like I had a pair of, I think it was Forester at one point that somebody had given me, and I threw them in the bed of my truck, and the buckle, the snap, like this thing, slammed against the bed of the truck in the bed, and it broke one of these off, and then the snap didn't work because it was a cheap quality plastic. So cheaper ones have cheaper components to them, right? So is it worth spending more money for a more expensive chainsaw chap? It's really up to you. At least make sure you're getting legitimate chaps that actually have some kind of rating for chainsaw work. Don't, you know, I most of the ones on Amazon have to meet that, at least as far as I know. And if you buy them through any of the actual like arborist supply or forestry supply companies, they're going to meet that. Another big thing to consider is the more snaps a leg has, the less bulging of the chap you'll have walking around, and the less opportunity branches and brush can get up in there, catch your leg and make you fall or tear your chaps or whatever. Whereas the fewer straps they have, the more space there is between your leg and the chap, and the easier it is to get caught on brush and whatever and make you fall or get up under there and trip you or whatever. And you don't want to be tripped, especially like going downhill, stepping over brush with a chainsaw on your head. Not real ideal to be tripped, right? So there is a difference between cheap chaps and expensive chaps. Now, what about chainsaw pants versus chaps? Well, that's a different thing because first, chainsaw pants are a pant you wear. So whatever temperature they are on you and whatever time of year it is, that's what you've got all day long. There's no options. Chainsaw chaps, you can take off when you're done cutting. Or if you need a break, you can unbutton your, unsnap your chainsaw chaps and let them, like, move them off your leg and air out your legs and cool off and whatever. Chainsaw pants, not so much. Even though I have known climbers to get down out of a tree in a summer day, unbuckle their pants, pull them down to their knees, and sit in the pickup truck with the AC on. Because some of those, even the climbing pants, they get hot, right? And some brands more than others. Some of that's due to just the fact that they're pants. Some of it's the fact that certain pants have more pockets or less pockets, and some pants have more chainsaw protection material or less chainsaw protection material. My favorites were the Clogger 02s. I don't know if they have a 3rd gen out. They might. I've never tried those, but I did love the Clogger Zeros. They were the coolest temperature-wise pant on the market, and I loved them. So one reason you might want to buy chainsaw pants is that typically, not always, there are some forestry chainsaw pants, but typically chainsaw pants are made for climbers, so they're very slim fit, so they don't get caught real easy on stuff. They usually have areas on the leg that are like high wear areas, and they have a wear resistant material, so that means that you don't get them worn as easily. Also, the other thing is that you don't have to put chaps on when you're tired and you're getting out of the tree and you need to buck up some wood. You already have them on. You always have them on. Some people wear chainsaw pants just simply for that, because they know they don't have the self-discipline to put their chaps on, to go dig them out of the truck and put them on or whatever. So they buy chainsaw pants and they always have pants on. Or chaps on, I should say. It's chainsaw protection. And then another thing to know is that chainsaw pants typically up at the top area have well, the whole pant has some 4-way stretch in them because they're made for climbers. So even though they're slim fit, you can walk around and stuff quite a bit, make some dynamic moves, whatever, and not like have the straps kind of restricting you like you might have on chaps, okay? So it's really just a preference thing. Chainsaw pants versus chainsaw chaps. Now, just know, and this is just a caveat for you guys, if you're looking at climber pants, not all climber pants, even arborist climbing pants, not all of them are chainsaw protection pants. Some climbing pants are not chainsaw protection. They're just simply climbing pants, which are 4-way stretch with pockets for different things and whatnot. So, yeah. Also, with chainsaw protection climbing pants, you're typically going to get multiple pockets on them, whereas most chaps might not have any pockets, or if they do, it might be one. So keep that in mind. So there's that. And I guess that's kind of it for today. I don't see any other comments or questions, so I don't really have anything to answer for you guys. Hope you guys are all doing very well. Please don't forget, if you haven't, stop by, check out the channel, like and subscribe if you would. That'd be super helpful. Always appreciate it when that happens. I'm trying to get more information out. Not everything's going to be about chainsaws and splitting wood and axes. That's what I'm doing right now, and that's what I'm focusing on. But I've also got just carpentry and tools and things that I'll be dealing with here in the near future. So if you're into any of that stuff as well, a little bit of wood sculpting, that's not the major focus, but I do some of that with the wood that I have. And we'll be comparing some new axes. I forgot, I didn't go over what I was going to go over, which is my Pickaroon that I made. So it's not perfect by any means. This was from a boys axe that I got from Murdoch's. If you don't know what Murdoch's is like Tractor Supply basically. They're just kind of, I don't know where they go to, but I know they're mainly West Coast. Not West Coast, Southwest, maybe Midwest. I don't know. And I converted a 2.5 pound boys axe into a Pickaroon. So, just thought I'd give a little show. I've shown it kind of, but not fully to everybody. Like I said, it's not perfect. Now, I do like this better than a lot of the Pickaroons that I've found or had or whatever that were directly like designed Pickaroons. Quite simply because this one is a Pickaroon. Pickaroon versus Hookaroon have their differences, and I have my own preferences depending on what I'm doing, but I like them both. They both work pretty well. What I really like is the ones that I'm making out of axe heads instead of the ones that I'm buying, and there's a specific reason for that. When I'm felling trees and bucking up stuff, I usually don't swing an axe near my chainsaw. I've never really found it efficient, and I've never found it like particularly enticing to swing an axe near my chainsaw. It's just not what I like to do. But I do pound wedges when I'm felling trees or when I'm trying to separate a pinch log or whatever, right? So what I was doing was I was carrying like a forestry axe like this guy, and I was carrying a Pickaroon, Hookaroon, whatever I had that day. And sometimes I change them based on either the job or based on what I feel like I would like to do that day or use that day. Because sometimes I just like using different tools. Sometimes it's not about a purpose, it's just about a feeling. And what I found is that it was extra weight, it was unnecessary. If I make a Pickaroon or Hookaroon out of an axe head, I get the benefit of pounding wedges with the back of it on the pole, and I get the benefit of the hook and pick on the front of it, like on this one. So from here on out, I'll probably be making all of sorry, from here on out I'll probably be making all of mine from axes, because, well, I just like it. Fun. And it's, for me, it's more practical. This one is a boys axe. It's a black diamond. I've never heard of black diamond tooling or whatever. It was from Murdoch's. It was like $23. It was 27.5 inches long, 2.5 pounds. Now the whole thing weighs like 1.8 pounds because I cut a bunch of the steel off the head, of course. And I did some very rough, this is not good quality, but I did some very rough wood checkering in it. And I just used literally a Japanese handsaw and a file to do that. And I put it in places where I knew that my hands would be most commonly. And remember, this is not an axe. It's just a Pickaroon. So I stab stuff, I pick it up and carry it around, or I stab stuff and flip and roll and whatever. So the axe handle doesn't have to be quite the same strength as a normal axe handle. And so I made some grooves in it for fingers. And I also glued and pinned this walnut on there for added palm swell and grip. And I did that in two positions. I did one right here, and then I did on the knob. I made some extra pieces that swell there, and they didn't turn out quite like I had thought, I miscalculated a couple of things. So like the pins aren't like where they should be. I used epoxy instead of wood glue because I was in a rush. But it works. It's just not the prettiest. Will I be making more of these? Yes. I like making them. They're fun. So it's just a new hobby I have. I like these. These are really cool. And if you haven't ever used a Pickaroon or Hookaroon, I honestly wish I had known about these or really understood them when I had the tree service. It would have made my life so much easier for so many reasons. So, if you haven't yet experienced a Pickaroon or Hookaroon, I recommend you look at one. Now, that being said, don't buy the super cheap ones. I got one from Amazon that was a steel hookaroon that came in two pieces and you bolted it together. And they had it on a flash sale. It was like $19 normally. They had it on a flash sale for $7 and it bent after 8 strikes into the wood. So if you're gonna get one, get a good one or make one yourself. The good ones you can get through, I mean, there's a bunch of different ones out there, but you know, Fiskars has one. I don't care for it a whole lot, but it's not that it's bad quality. It's that I just don't like the feel of it in my hand, and I don't know. There's just a lot about it that I don't care for, but it is good quality. It's not going to break on you. Council Tool makes one. I've ordered one, but I haven't received it yet, so I'm waiting on that to come in. So I can't say how good it is or not. Husqvarna has a Hookaroon that I don't know who's making that. It might be Hultafors or Hulksberg or Grandfors. No, Grandfors doesn't make any Hookaroons or Pickaroons, I don't think. So I don't know who's making that one, but it looks forged and it looks like it's quality. And that one would be the Husqvarna one, right? GarrettWade.com has some that I can't speak for. But I know Garrett Wade doesn't make their tools. They just have them made and branded for themselves. Like, not at least those, the axes and stuff. The axes, I think, are made by King's Tooling Company or something. I don't know. But what is interesting to me is that Garrett Wade has a actual, what's it called? Log pick. So it almost looks like the pick end of a mattock, but so it's long and it's a log pick. I don't know what industry. I don't know if that's a European thing or if that's just an old like logging tool from the US that nobody, but I haven't seen anybody else who makes those. So it was just interesting. I might eventually get one just to look at it and see. The tools through Garrett Wade aren't that expensive. They're not cheap, but they're not that expensive. I will say before you go buy a Garrett Wade axe or, there we go. Sorry about that, got cut off. It looks like it's the exact same thing through Home Depot online. They're called Pure Country, I think is what they have them as, branded as. And I'm telling you, the axes look exactly the same. So there's that. Also in the future, I would really like to check out the Hultafors, as I think how you say it, splitting wedge. It looks pretty cool. I don't know how useful or handy. I don't know how well it splits because, so here's, man, we could talk about this all night. Something to think about though is that everybody talks about Swedish axes, so, or Finnish axes or German axes, and they are really good. But splitting profiles and head profiles were designed and developed based on the woods and uses that they had in their local area. So that might be the kind of wood they're splitting, the size of wood they're splitting. Also, it might include the way they're processing things, right? That all being said, some Swedish axes, while they're very cool, and especially like mild forestry action, mild forestry axes, or what's it called? Bushcraft axes, camping hatchets, axes, that kind of stuff. They're pretty universal. Like, whether made in Finland, the United States, whatever, Japan, they're gonna do their job pretty well anywhere. But when it comes to splitting mauls and splitting axes, that becomes a different story, because the way that wood is processed, the size of trees that they have in general is different. And so some of their stuff doesn't work as well on some stuff that we have in the United States. They're really quality axes. I'm not denying that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't get one. Just saying it's not like their splitting axe is going to work perfectly on everything we have, because it wasn't designed for everything we have. Can you make it work? Yeah, you hit something enough times with even a sledgehammer, you can bust the stump apart. But if you want to be efficient, then those tools might not be exactly what you thought. But that's really a longer topic for another day, and I'll try to do more lives. I appreciate everybody that stopped by. Please, once again, if you haven't, don't forget to please go and subscribe, and please go and subscribe, and also like this video if you haven't. I would really appreciate it. And make sure you hit that bell to get all the notifications of all the videos I'm putting up. I have a bunch of little shorts that I'm putting up, almost one a day. And then I'm putting up longer format stuff, anywhere between, 3 or 4 minutes all the way up to 15 minutes, multiple times a week. So thanks, guys. Talk to you in the next one. Take care.